You hold the page to the lamplight, but there is no publisher, no date, only a title and lines that seem to writhe. You bring it closer, and the scent hits you, not old paper, but the sharp, clean bite of ozone after a storm, layered over a sweet, fungal decay like wet earth in a tomb. The air in your study grows still and cold. This is not a book, it is a door. This is the story of the man who tried to broadcast a signal into the void and what answered back. But to understand that signal, you must first meet the man in Providence on a rainy night in 1921, and the strange machines he brought to a crowded hall. Picture a crowded lecture hall in Providence, Rhode Island, on a late autumn evening in 1921. The air is thick with the smell of damp wool coats and stale pipe smoke, 100 bodies packed into wooden seats under the weak glow of electric bulbs. That feeling when a charismatic speaker holds an entire room captive. You've been there at a concert or a talk where the air itself seemed charged. This was that, but different. The man who took the stage was gaunt, dressed in clothes that were just slightly out of fashion, and he carried with him a collection of odd box-like devices. But it was his eyes you would have remembered. They burned, not with passion but with a cold, focused intensity, as if he were examining each person in the room and finding them amusing. He did not introduce himself, he simply began demonstrating his machines. They hummed to life not with the sharp buzz of electricity, but with a low, resonant thrum that vibrated in your teeth. It was a sound that felt less like mechanics and more like distant chanting, heard through stone. With a wave of his hand, strange lights, colors that had no name, danced between his devices without wires. Shadows on the wall behind him seemed to move independently, stretching into shapes that suggested limbs or perhaps wings. The audience sat in perfect, breathless silence. No one coughed, no one shifted. They were not amazed, they were mesmerized. The tension in the room was a wire pulled taut, humming alongside his machines. Then it stopped. He bowed, a small, precise gesture. The spell broke. People blinked, looked at their neighbors as if waking, and began to gather their coats in a confused rustle of fabric. The rain had started outside, a cold drizzle against the windows. As they filed out into the dark, wet street, each person found they were holding a small, cheaply printed pamphlet. None could recall taking it. The title, in smudged ink, promised revelations about the nature of reality and the void beyond the stars. The gaunt man was gone. His impossible machines vanished with him, leaving only the memory of that chanting hum and the unsettling certainty that they had not been spectators at a show. They had been participants in something else entirely, and the pamphlet in their hand was not an invitation. It was a receipt. 3 nights later, you are alone in your boarding house room, the single gas lamp on the desk gutters, casting a trembling amber light that makes the shadows in the corners breathe. Outside, the Providence night is still and cold. The pamphlet is in your hands. You never decided to keep it. It simply remained, moving from coat pocket to desk, a silent, persistent guest. You smooth its cheap paper under your palms. The illustrations are wrong. At first glance, they seem like crude woodcuts of astronomical charts or alchemical diagrams, concentric circles, angular sigils, but your eye cannot settle. The lines that form a many-pointed star in one moment seem, when you glance away and back, to have rearranged into a spiraling vortex or a cluster of spheres obeying no perspective you recognize. It is a visual whisper, a suggestion of a shape that exists just outside the mind's ability to render it. You know that feeling, finding something unsettling in a used book or an old document, that moment when harmless curiosity tips into unease. This is that moment, stretched over an hour. The text is worse. It is printed in English, but the sentences are structured with a cadence that feels alien, like a familiar song played backward. It speaks of yawning gulfs and the architecture of unlight, promising that the secrets of the cosmos are not locked away, but simply waiting for the correct angle of perception. It whispers that the walls of reality are thin, and that to learn how to listen at them is the first and only true science. The words do not feel read, they feel absorbed, seeping in through the eyes. You hold the page closer to the lamp, seeking a publisher's mark, a date, anything to anchor it to the ordinary world. There is nothing, only the title and those shifting, impossible lines, and then you catch the scent, you bring the paper to your face, and the smell is not of old pulp and ink, but something metallic and clean beneath a deeper, sweet rot undertone, ozone, like the air after a lightning strike, and decay, like wet soil in a sealed room. The gas lamp flickers violently, not from a draft. The air is perfectly still in that second of wavering light. The diagrams on the page seem to snap into a terrible, momentary clarity. You do not see a symbol, you see a place, a vast black plain under a starless sky, and upon it a silhouette of impossible proportion, turning its head, not toward you. You are beneath its notice. It is turning toward something else, something that has just begun to scream in the dark, a sound the pamphlet's text suddenly implies you could hear if you only knew how to listen. The lamp steadies. The page is just a page again. You set it down, your fingers tingling. The quiet of your room is no longer peaceful, it is watchful. You realize with a slow, cold certainty that the pamphlet is not a receipt for what you witnessed. It is a receipt for your attention, and attention once given is a currency that cannot be taken back. The ink smells of storms and graves. You close the cover. The silence that follows is the loudest sound you have ever heard. That receipt for your attention, you see, is not a one-time transaction. It is a ledger, and the entity that keeps the books has many offices, many faces. The pamphlet in Providence was one. 2 years later, and half a world away, another entry was made. Cairo, 1923 midnight. Picture a dust-choked archive in the basement of a rented villa. The air thick and still, tasting of powdered limestone and age. A young archaeologist, we'll call him Arthur, works alone. His lantern is the only island of light in a sea of stacked crates and rolled papyri. He is translating a stele, a slab of black basalt unearthed that afternoon from a site that should not have existed so close to the city. His fingers, chalk white with dust, trace the newly revealed hieroglyphs. The carvings tell of a pharaoh whose name is rendered with a glyph for the faceless one. But the accompanying image is of a man with sharp, handsome features, holding a staff topped with a strange, twisted symbol. Arthur leans closer, wiping grit from the stone. In the next panel, the pharaoh is depicted again, but the line of the jaw is different. The set of the eyes more severe between carvings, the face has changed, and the staff he shifts the lantern. The staff's carved shadow on the stone wall does not fall away from the light source. It stretches in 2 directions at once, a forked darkness defying the single flame. You know that shift in perception working late on a project, the building empty around you when a familiar environment suddenly feels watched. The geometry of the room becomes suspect. That is the air in the archive now. Arthur's own notes, written in his precise hand, begin to betray a fraying logic. Pedestal inscription references the crawling gift he has written. Then, below, the gift is sight. The crawling is the price. He underlines price twice. The final line on the page reads, "The shadow of the staff is not cast. It is drinking." He looks from his notes back to the stele. The hieroglyphs seem to swim in the lamplight. They are no longer static history. They feel like a narrative happening in real time, a story reaching forward from the deep past to this moment, to him. The silence is absolute, a woolen pressure in the ears. He becomes aware of his own heartbeat, a frantic living counter-rhythm to the dead stone. Then the lantern gutters. Not a flicker. A dying plunge into absolute black. The darkness is immediate and total, a physical substance filling his mouth and eyes. He freezes, one hand still on the cold surface of the stele. And the stone is warm. Not residual heat from the lantern, a deep internal warmth, like flesh. As his paralyzed fingers register it, he feels a slow rhythmic pulse throb through the basalt. Thump. A long pause. Thump. It is the tempo of a resting heart, vast and slow. The archive is no longer a room. It is the chest cavity of something old, and he is trapped inside, feeling its heartbeat through the walls of its tomb. The darkness around him is no longer an absence of light. It is a presence, patient and attentive, having felt the tiny, scratching attention of the thing on the other side of the stone. The ledger has been updated. The crawling chaos has many faces, and in the dark, Arthur has just felt the pulse of the one that wears the skin of the earth itself. The sun rose over Cairo not with a gentle glow, but with a sudden, clinical clarity, bleaching the color from the sky and casting long, sharp shadows across the dig site. Arthur stood at the trench's edge, his body rigid with a sleepless tension. The night in the archive had unspooled into a blur of frantic sensation, the shocking warmth of the stone, the profound, listening dark, culminating in the lantern flaring back to life of its own accord, revealing the stela once more cold and inert. He had fled, blaming dust in the fuel line, a trick of exhausted nerves. But dawn demanded verification. Now, in the clean desert light, the stone slab should have been a simple archaeological artifact. It was not. Overnight, the carvings had changed. The hieroglyphs of the faceless Pharaoh were gone. In their place, etched with impossible freshness into the ancient basalt, was a map of the night sky. Not a symbolic representation, but a perfect, precise chart of the constellations as they had appeared directly above this patch of desert. Arthur's trained eye recognized the alignment instantly, and the recognition turned his blood to ice. It was not a map of last night's sky. The positions were offset, accounting for the slow wobble of the Earth's axis, a precessional shift that placed this exact stellar arrangement over 10,000 years in the past. The stone had not been carved, it had rearranged itself, recording a memory of heaven from an age when human civilization was a whisper in the Nile mud. This is that specific, intimate horror of violation, scaled to a cosmic degree. It is the sensation of waking to find something in your home subtly changed. A book moved to a different shelf. A door left ajar when you are certain you closed it. That cold, sliding realization that your private space is not entirely your own, that the rules of your sanctuary have been quietly rewritten by an unseen visitor. Arthur's dig site, his professional domain, had been altered. The ledger had been updated again, not with an entry but with a correction to reality itself. He called for Mahmud, his most trusted foreman, to bring the photographic plates. The man approached only to the rim of the trench, his face ashen beneath his keffiyeh. He would not descend. "Ya Bey," he said, his voice low, "the stone is not for touching. The old ones in the village. They say such stones are not carved by hands, they are grown, and they remember." Arthur, his mind reeling with astronomical calculations, pressed him. "Remember what?" Mahmud's eyes darted to the stele, its star map gleaming in the rising sun. "The face," he whispered. "It remembers the face of every man who touches it, to keep or to give to what waits in the dark." He refused to say more, backing away with a reverence that was purely fear. Arthur stood alone above the trench, the morning heat beginning to shimmer on the sand. Below him, the stone held its silent, impossible record. He did not touch it again. He took his photographs under the harsh noon sun, developed the plates himself in a trembling chemical bath, and mailed the results to Miskatonic with a letter that was a masterpiece of academic restraint, saying only that the artifact warranted urgent and discreet study. He left the stele in the trench, ordered it reburied, and took the next ship home. He never returned to Egypt. The photographs, I am told, were filed under optical anomalies and forgotten. But that is not the only kind of record. There is another kind, written not in star charts or acid-etched silver, but in the memory of a voice. I have a transcript, sent to me by a listener in Maine, of a recording made in 1972, an oral history project capturing the stories of the oldest lobstermen along the rocky coast. Most of it is weather and wages, but one entry, from a man named Elias Harlow, aged 94, is different. You hear it first in the quality of the tape, the hiss of the reel-to-reel, the pop of a wood stove, the old man's breath, wet and labored. He is describing the great storm of October 1925, how the sky turned the color of a bruise and the wind sounded like something tearing, how he watched from this very cottage window as the Marianne and the Sea Dog and old Pete Coffin's Dawn Treader were lifted by a wave that had no right to be that tall. And then he says, his voice dropping to a salt-cured whisper, "The crest of that wave, it didn't break, it held, and on it, walking calm as Sunday, was a man." Wore my boy Jacob's face. Jacob, who'd been taken by the sea 2 summers prior, he was smiling, not a happy smile, the smile a man gives a trap that's just sprung. He looked right at my window, raised a hand, and the wave just folded over, took all 3 boats down like a hand closing. There is a long silence on the tape, filled only by the fire. This is that feeling, hearing a family story that's always been told as legend, but seeing the teller's eyes, and knowing it's not a story at all. The interviewer, a young graduate student, gently asks what he thought he saw. Elias's reply is the sound of pure, undiluted recognition. "Didn't think nothin' I saw. He wasn't lost. He was wearing my boy's skin, and he was pleased with the fit." On the tape, you hear the scratch of a match, the deep pull as he lights his pipe. The interviewer thanks him, begins to pack her equipment, but the recorder, left running, captures one last thing, the old man exhaling a long, trembling stream of smoke into the firelight. The listener who sent me. The tape to me noted that his final words, spoken to the empty room, were almost inaudible. He's still out there, trying on faces, seeing which ones make us look. That recording sat in a university archive for decades, digitized eventually, a single WAV file in a sea of data. It's the kind of thing you find in that 3 a.m. internet rabbit hole where you find a piece of information that connects dots you wish had stayed separate, because a voice is one thing, but a voice corroborated by an official ink and paper record from the same night. That is something else entirely. So I went looking, not for more stories, but for a frame, a timestamp, a piece of the world that would say this happened in measurable reality. And I found it. Not in a folk archive, but in the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration's digital library, a scanned PDF of a weather log from the USCGC Tamarack, a Coast Guard cutter on patrol off the Maine coast in October of 1925. The entries are all brisk, professional typewriter font, barometric readings, wind speeds, sea states. Until the entry for 23 Hugger hours on the night Elias Harlow described. The log notes a sudden, localized depression of the barometer inconsistent with surrounding readings and anomalous atmospheric phenomena observed to the northeast, a stationary luminous haze at sea level. The next entry, at 0130, is terse. Responded to distress signals, located wreckage field consistent with multiple small craft. No survivors located. But then, a final handwritten addendum in the margin initialed by the officer of the watch. One individual recovered from debris, suffering severe exposure and shock. Insists he was pulled from the water by a man walking on the waves. Subject sedated. Transferred to Portland Infirmary at dawn. There it is. The frame around the nightmare. The official document that doesn't explain, but simply records the impossible, pressing its thumbprint into the real world. The fisherman from the tape, and this nameless, sedated survivor from the log, they are points on a map, and the line you draw between them doesn't trace a storm's path. It traces a stroll. I close the browser. The blue light of the screen vanishes, leaving only the dim amber of my desk lamp. The search is over. The connection is made. And the room feels colder, distinctly colder, as if the act of linking those two records, the whispered memory and the typed report, opened a tiny door. Not to let something in, but to acknowledge that something is already here, and has been, reading over our shoulder. It is the chill of being seen by the thing you're trying to see. The crawling chaos doesn't just wear our faces. He reads our logs. He listens to our tapes. He leaves just enough evidence to make us wonder, and wondering is the first step into a much